World This Week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune, and with us, columnist from the Sunday Telegraph, and Elisabeth Moutet. How are you?
Hello, very well.
Okay, also with us, Craig Kapidis of Bloomberg News, just back from...
Marrakesh by way of Athens.
There you go. Athens, that's topical. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, it's the capital of Greece.
Yes. Nicholas Norbrook, who cracks the whip at the Africa Report, now publishing...
Every month.
Every month.
Absolutely.
Okay. Used to be bi-monthly, now it's monthly. Soon to be weekly, right?
We're going to run a newswire very soon.
All right. And Anne Navarro Pedro of Portugal's leading news magazine, Visão. Thank you for being with us as well. The World This Week, by the way, not just for Fridays and weekends. We've got a Facebook page to prove it, where you can weigh in on the conversation. Also a Twitter account, where our handle is @FrancoisF24. 3 years ago, when the G20 first convened, Wall Street had just gone thud. Luck had run out on the high rollers of finance. World leaders convened on Washington at the time with the stated aim of making banks boring again. 5 G20 summits later, someone's finally managed the feat of making banking seem boring. Not because of grand reform. He wasn't even on the original guest list at the Riviera Resort of Cannes. The gatecrasher we are talking about is the Greek Prime Minister, who caught everyone off guard by announcing a referendum on last week's agreed EU bailouts plan. Bring on the ancient Greek references, like the one we can show you from the Salt Lake City Tribune, depicting George Papandreou as Odysseus tied to the mast of his vessel. I don't know what the sirens are saying there, but we see, I know, let's have a referendum. All those in favor of a rescue. And there his crew jumps overboard. Craig Kapidis, when the other world leaders say that they were caught off guard by the announcement of that referendum, should we believe them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Papandreou and PASOK are doing everything in their power just to retain their power. It's not politics in Greece anymore, it's poker. And both parties, the leadership of both parties, have absolutely no idea what to do and how to handle this situation. They are clueless. And the reason they're clueless, there's a bunch of reasons, but the main one is the arithmetic doesn't work. They don't have the money to pay back any of these loans, let alone the principal, let alone have the money to keep the economy going.
But that's a dirty little secret. Everyone knows that.
But no one wants to talk about it.
It's not just the Greeks who
They're kicking... Well, other countries produce things. Italy produces something. Other countries produce things. The Greeks are kicking the can down the road. What's going to happen there over the next... And I'm Greek, so, we specialize in prophecies. That's the one thing we're good in. Is you're going to see this government collapse. You are going to see a caretaker be brought in, a troika. It will probably be Luka Papadimos, who was the vice at the ECB. He's an economist, a physicist, trained at MIT. They need technocrats in there to fix this situation. And the gorilla in the room here, and if you want to get into a fight with any Greek or anyone at G20, you mention, the D word, drachma. There is still a very good chance, despite everyone saying, no, Greece is not going to go back to the drachma, that they will have to go back to the drachma for some time. There's a darn good chance of that. And this fellow, Papadimos, is fascinating in that he is a great proponent of the euro. He believes that Greece should stay on the euro, and 70% of the Greeks in the polls believe that as well. But you can only take so much austerity. What I've seen down there are people are growing more and more fed up. For Greece to pay off, to even get close to paying off the debt, they're looking at cutting by 50%, plus selling off most of the state's silver or leasing it off to the Chinese, selling off all their oil and gas pipelines, airports, you name it, just to raise money to feed this machine. So right now, Greece doesn't need these politicians, whether they're New Democracy or PASOK. They need some technocrats, because the Greeks are fed up with politics. They want someone to come in there and fix it. And drachma just may be the fix.
And Navarro Pedro, Portugal's finances are not in great shakes, but but it's nothing as exciting as what we've seen this week out of
No,
Athens.
because the big difference between Portugal and Greece is the system. Portugal is a centralized country, and it's a country that has reformed its political system and its administration. It has been doing so for a long time. There is no generalized corruption. There is corruption in Portugal, okay, as in France or the United States or Great Britain for that matter, but it's not the same generalized system as in Greece. It's not because the Greeks are corrupt genetically. I mean, when they live in another country, they pay their taxes like everybody else, and they are not going around trying to give the buck to anyone to, in order to get something done. But it's the system, and the political class hasn't reformed it. We have been reformed. But we are, at the end of the day, we are at the same point. We have a population, the middle class, that is really bearing the burden of this situation that has not been made by them. We have shattered dreams. We have a youth that is leaving the country, the educated youth leaving the country because they cannot find jobs. You have educated people with PhDs who are working during the day as a scientist, and at night they are delivering pizza. And now guess what? You can't work anymore as a scientist, and you don't even have a job as a pizza deliverer anymore. People are really having a really hard time just to live. Children have to get out of school if they were in private schools, go into public school. Public school has been slashed. No more teachers. So many teachers being unemployed now. You don't have enough room for all the children that try now to enroll into public school. You have food problems. You have hunger already in some layers of population. So at the end of the day, we are standing where Greece is standing. We have a system that works, but we are being drained out of our blood as a nation by the actual meanderings of the European Union and the financial system.
All right, but one of the things you don't have is the public relations issue, which we've seen with the spectacle that unfolded this week. Craig, we can, for instance...
Hold on. We had a problem in the beginning of the year, just like Greece, because what happened
And the government fell.
The government fell. No, the government, the opposition, the right, the conservative opposition was saying, no, we don't want this austerity program. The socialist government said, okay, I can get a bigger majority and I can get legitimacy, in order to put forward the program. They went to elections, they lost. The next political, the right wing came back to power, and they are implementing a rather more restrictive program. So that was all. It was exactly the same situation. Papandreou was more, I would say, Machiavellic. He came up with the idea of a referendum that made havoc all over the world.
You're giving Machiavelli a bad name by comparing it to...
And I got to say, we showed that cartoon at the outset, Craig, but there are millions of these like this. I won't inflict too many of them on you, but there is one here printed in Dutch daily newspaper, Handelsblad, that perhaps we can show out. We saw it for a second. It went away. Is it coming back? Well, maybe it will. There it is. Comparing Greece, again, the references to ancient Greece. I got to ask, not the journalist, but the man who holds a Greek passport. How do you feel about your country being dragged in the mud in this way?
Well, no, I look upon it as a stage play. I mean, this is out of Euripides. We're now waiting for. You remember the concept in Greek drama of the Deus ex machina who comes in and saves the day. That's what we're waiting for here. And as I said, the betting is, and if it's correct, is this going to be Papademos? Who he's not going to end the crisis, but he will be able to calm the tensions. What you were saying was fascinating about Portugal, and I think you raised a really good point. 3 years ago, I remember sitting down with the Prime Minister at Davos, and he said to me, yes, corruption is institutionalized here. It was never institutionalized in Portugal. And what is fascinating about that statement is not the admission that there was institutionalized corruption, but you have essentially two families who have run this country since World War II, and
That's a dictatorship.
Yeah, and by the way, Greece is also a theocracy. Many people don't know this, but Greece is the only country in Europe where tax dollars pay the clergy.
Tax dollar pay the clergy in Germany, and
do they really? I didn't know that.
They do. You have to opt
I didn't know
out.
that.
It's an opt-out system. Exactly. If you have to declare that you belong to no church. Other than that, you have to assign your tax. Euros now, they were Deutschmarks, to whichever obedience you belong to.
But you could opt out.
You can opt out, and you have to make a formal declaration that you're an atheist.
No, we don't get to do that in Greece. You're Orthodox or you're not.
And just one final point on all this before we move on and talk about the bigger picture.
Right.
We've all been getting sucked up this week into this domestic drama. There's one man, quite interesting, the finance minister, Evangelos Venizelos. He backs Papandreou. He doesn't back Papandreou.
He's okay. He's what we call one of New Democracy or PASOK's revolving cronies of the Papandreou family. He was the former Minister of Culture and Tourism, which probably goes to prove why you shouldn't make someone who's from the Ministry of Culture in the Finance Ministry. This is cronyism at the highest level, and there's two ways to look at what's happening in Greece, and I think and both ways are valid. You can look at this as a completely numerical story, which the markets are doing and a lot of people are doing. The way I'm looking at this, and I think it's the better way to look at it, as a psychological narrative of what's going on there, where you're seeing 11 million people getting roasted because of the cronyism and corruption of these two families who have run Greece for over 60 years. But at the end of the day, and here's the interesting thing, it was the Greek people who elected them. They kept electing them because these families kept giving out jobs to various people to ensure that this.
So if the technocrats come in, that might.
If the technocrats come in, you might. This is just my own opinion, but I think that only the technocrats can come in and cut the budget by 50%. But then the question is, can the Greek people deal with that for another 10 to 15 years?
I think that really is the question. It has to be rooted in what the people do. And actually, maybe the referendum isn't such a crazy move as you might think. I mean, if you just pull back a few decades, Africa had a debt crisis followed very quickly by a solvency crisis, and it was facing exactly the same problems, structural adjustment programs imposed from the outside, which didn't work because the people hadn't been part of their creation and hadn't gone along with them.
If you made that comparison in Athens, you'd be stoned.
Absolutely.
How about the comparison with Korea? And because that's the story with a happy ending. You have the one crisis in '97, and you have the IMF going into Seoul and making themselves so unpopular that the worst possible insult in Korean for several years, and certainly in '99, 2000, which were the 2 years where I went to Korea, was IMF. You wanted to tell someone. When you called somebody an IMF and you had fights in the street, people punching one another because the dreaded word was IMF. It had been used against them. And they went out of their crisis and they're back, and they're now one of the emerging powers and the ones who probably are going to take over part of our economies. So, there are times when these things work. I was in Greece a month ago, and it was the first time I was in Greece since shortly after the colonels left. So it was, it was a very
That's a long
country.
time.
It's a very long time. I had been there as a child. And what fascinated me about Greece is you talk about the Minister of Tourism becoming the finance minister. I understand that is one of the two main sources of income for the country. So there may be some sense in assuming that they do tourism right.
No, they don't.
I will disagree on this one. I was completely new.
I just did a huge story on this. Their tourism figures are up 12% this year over last year, but all of the people are just going to the islands. And in talking with numerous Greek business leaders there and bankers, Greece has never taken full advantage of its assets. They've never turned Greece into like a Rome or a Paris. There's no Versailles there. There's no Louvre. The museums there are in a state of decay. The cultural life in comparison to other great cities in Europe is in a total state of collapse. In fact, the Minister of Culture admitted this to me. He said, his quote was, he said, "Athens is a black hole for tourism." They're just not, they're not generating the dollars.
There's still a long way to go there. The question, though, and no disrespect to our viewers in Athens, but this is the G20 we're supposed to be talking about, and are we getting caught up in a sideshow? Well, for NYU economist Nouri El-Roubini, the problem's not Greece. He says the biggest Eurozone problem is lack of growth competitiveness, and German European Central Bank medicine, recessionary deflation, ensures insolvency in all pigs, that is to say Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. They don't call him Dr. Doom for nothing. Of course, that's not how the Germany's best-selling newspaper sees this story. For Bild Zeitung, it's all about Greece, with Thursday's headline blaring, Frau Merkel, we also want a referendum to kick the Greeks out of the Eurozone. So, again, Nicholas Norbrook, it raises the question, is this the problem about the feckless Greeks or the people who lent them all that dough?
Well, I think obviously it's hard to separate the two, but this isn't just a Greek problem. We've seen similar kinds of debt problems in most southern European countries, and we've also seen people very keen to lend to them over the last 10 years, thinking that the euro was going to be a cast iron guarantee. And I mean, maybe this is the point where people start taking some kind of fiscal European Union a little bit more seriously. The idea, perhaps, of a German finance minister conducting fiscal policy in Greece has unhealthy echoes of the Second World War.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But nevertheless, the Eurozone did everything except have some kind of fiscal unity in its policy making.
That happened in the late 19th century, by the way. There was the Troika then. Greece was in great debt. They actually came down and set up tables at Piraeus, and as deals were done, customs money was exchanged. The Greeks never saw the money. It was taken by representatives from Germany, England, and I believe France.
Well, the Spartans set up table in Piraeus in 400 BC as well. That Piraeus has not been a very
maybe is a Greek problem.
The Spartans, I mean, not the Cretans, the Spartans.
And
so
just
it's not
as
been a
now,
good
I
place.
mean, you mentioned again that southern countries are fully in debt. They are so such spenders. I mean, look at the debt in France, in Germany as well, in other countries,
The
in
UK.
UK, but also as in Austria. Look at it. Well, I mean, this has been one of those cliches that has been, used to explain the whole thing. The whole problem started actually long ago, long before states that needed money in order to fulfill for more expenses than they had resources, used to borrow it from central banks. At one point, it was said this is a problem that keeps inflation. So central banks closed the tap, the hot water tap for money, and governments and states start borrowing in international financial markets. Now, and they deregulated at the same time. This started with Reagan and Thatcher. They deregulated these markets.
When we come back, we'll pick up on that. It's, after all, as we've been saying, it's not just about the Greeks. It's also about the Italians. Stay with us.